And so even for you that are watching, we want this to be your commonplace, because in the comment section, things like that, we get to share those things and we all benefit. So that's where the naming language came from.
Dean, good to see you.
Brilliant. Live and in the flesh.
Yes. Good to be together.
It is indeed.
So here we are recording another Coaches Commonplace episode, first one of 2023. But
amazing.
Even before we jump into that, how have you been and what has been inspiring you, Dean?
Wow. Well, there's something, even though I'm old enough now, I just turned 53. I'm old enough to know better that there's really nothing magical about these new year beginnings. At least I've convinced myself of that, but it still just makes the biggest impact on me. So coming into this year, I've got a word for this year.
Tell me.
Expand.
Sounds painful.
Yeah, not in the waist. I'm hoping to do that side different. But expand. I mean, it's interesting how I also don't choose these words. They end up just kind of just presenting themselves to me. Mm-hmm. And so in business and friendships and relationships and emotions, I'm really interested to see how that plays out. And if you've watched some of the other podcasts, you know my 3 core values of adventure, awe, and advocacy. And I think this word expand is going to give me some new places to go play with those 3 core values. What about you?
Awesome. Well, one thing that I've been using to guide me without really knowing what it means is that I made the declaration late last year that 2023 would be the best year of my life. And here we are, 13
painful.
days in. It in some ways it is. It has been already, but it's good. And I'm ready, man. I think I stagnated some and during what I would call broadly the pandemic. A lot of changes for everyone, I think. But I'm ready for something new.
So declaration.
Yes.
That word sounds intentional that you chose that. Why a declaration?
Well, you ever see the episode of The Office where Michael runs in and declares bankruptcy?
I do recall
And then
this.
they say to him, Michael, that's not how this works, right? But I have learned that there is power in declaring something, right? And I have a teacher who once suggested that language has the power to create in a way that is similar to if you said the word chair and a chair came out of your mouth.
Yes.
Now that's a strange visual.
That is a strange visual.
But when you realize that so much of the world we exist in is made up in language, right? That whether you're a college graduate or not,
right,
and being conferred with a diploma, it's in language, or being married, the vows you speak in the marriage certificate, it's all language that says you're married, or the fact you have the title to your home, it's in language.
Yes.
Right. And a declaration can be a very conscious and powerful act, a speech act, to bring something forth which literally didn't exist before. And yeah, you're right. So that is a definite, and specific use of language on my part.
Best year ever. Is that what you said?
That's what I said. #BYE, right?
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.
Not looking back.
Cute.
Not looking back. Yeah. So Coaches Commonplace, Dean, what is this? What are we doing? Why do we call it that?
Yeah. So you're going to see somewhere on the bumper you just watched as this started, or somewhere below here, Coaches Commonplace. It's a term that my wife introduced me to. There's a commonplace book. So in 1685, this guy, John Locke, Locke, kind of created, people had it, but he kind of formalized it of this is how you should organize this book. And so as the history goes, if you go into the late 1700s, much more common, more famous people, presidents and philosophers. Charles Darwin used this to capture a lot of his thoughts. But in a home or in a public place, you would just find this book in a common place. And it was a place to capture thoughts and jokes and proverbs and recipes and just all those things. But that's where you would capture it. Mm-hmm. Kind of even as we started, it's a written language.
Right.
And so it was just a place to capture that. So as you and I were talking about your experience in life and your experience in coaching and how those two things come together, I've had the same experience. we've created a commonplace to capture some of that. And so even for you that are watching, this is really, we want this to be your commonplace, because in the comment section, things like that, we get to share those things and we all benefit. So that's where the naming language came from.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, today, as the name suggests, I want to talk about coaching.
Okay.
A couple things related to coaching. And some things that are, I think, essential or foundational to living a good life, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, we're going to break into it, because what does it mean to have a good life?
Yeah. And that's a question I've been asking myself pretty intensely for a long time, but more intensely since my father passed, which will now be, next month is 14 years. It's hard to believe he's been gone almost a decade and a half. But having seen my father, who was a very successful business person, die at the age of 64 with his legs amputated due to complications from diabetes, with a long list of other ailments that were largely a result of him prioritizing his work over his health.
Right.
It really caused me to think, what is success? Is it worth it? That kind of thing. And I'm really keen to be deliberate about whatever it is we pursue, and not to just do it because it's what's expected of us, or because it's, what society tells us we should do, or because we don't know what else to do, but to be very thoughtful and intentional in that pursuit.
So even you talking about that, I've heard that story before, and those that are watching for the first time may not have heard you say that, but there's a weightiness, even as you talk about that, there's a seriousness about this living a good life. And it's almost like, it almost doesn't even, how can you be so heavy and burdened with the idea of living a good life?
Yeah. No, it's a fair question. And I think part of it is, broadly we see this in society, that, we see the happiness, the positive psychology movement, and the happiness inquiry that has been going on for 20 years or so. But, right. And I think that's very natural, because as I see it, as a society where we have achieved a level of security and a level of comfort. Now, granted, there's a lot of people struggling in a lot of ways.
That's right.
But we're not, most of us, people watching this, aren't collecting firewood. They're not walking 5 miles to the river for water. Right. They're not worried about where their next meal is coming from, hopefully, and they're not in a conflict zone. So there's a basis of, Maslow's hierarchy that we have attained. And now we're looking for these other things that are closer to self-actualization of purpose and meaning, right? And contribution and belonging, these things that are more intangible. And with that, there's no single answer. I don't think if there was one answer, I think we would have discovered it already. Yes. And it would be, we'd all worship the same religion. We all eat the same food.
I like to think about this. We are joining a conversation that's been happening for thousands of years.
Exactly.
Or longer.
Yeah. And I, there's a teacher that I learned from, an Eastern teacher, who will say that the issues we're dealing with are the same 10,000 years ago, and they'll be the same 10,000 years from now. And in essence, it really is the problem of human suffering. Yeah. So it gets, I tend to get maybe a little philosophical, or even sometimes a little bit heavy, as I've known myself. As long as I've known myself to be someone who has a melancholy disposition, or kind of look at, I don't find the silver lining always. It's been something I've endeavored to do more consciously. And quite honestly, it's something that has helped me to continue to survive. I haven't talked about this a lot, but when I was young, I didn't think I'd make it to 30. My vision for my future was one where my life ended in suicide. Wow. That was it. I didn't know how exactly, I didn't know when, but it was basically a given that that's how it would be. And, fortunately, through teachers and friends and other serendipitous events, that has changed in a pretty dramatic way. Yes. But all that's to answer your thing about how can this be so heavy? Well, that's kind of where I tend to go. Is the big picture and the why behind things. And does this even mean anything? Well, where I want to join you in that, if I project on anyone who's listening to this, it's one of those topics where it rarely ends with a period. It usually just ends in a ... It's just this drift off, and you get distracted by whatever squirrel runs by, because it seems so unanswerable.
you kind of just get lost in this infinite. You ask, well, it's a peeling back of the onion. I mean, there's just more and more and more and more. But you've traveled far and wide and have really sourced some good ideas in this pursuit of a good life. And then how can we take some of that? Why is that important to all of us? And why is it important to us as coaches specifically?
Yeah. Well, then the way I see that is that we're all on the same journey as human beings. We're on the journey from birth to death. We're on the journey, know it or not, from ignorance to wisdom,
right.
Or at least to knowledge. We're always learning, right? Or we can be. And so from that standpoint, there's a very fundamental similarity that we all have. And then beyond that, we all want to be happy. We want to be warm. We want to be loved. We want to matter. So there's these core elements that are even needs. I think they're needs. And I hate to admit needing anything, right? Yeah. But I think that's true. And then when it comes to coaching, this idea of learning to live your own best life, like anything that helps you be a better version of yourself will help you be a better coach, right? And it's not only because you'll have been through things that you can help guide other people through, but your example and your inspiration,
right,
can serve others.
Right. Yeah. This just has to be a true statement for all of us. I wish I knew then what I know now.
Sure.
Man, it would be so different. My working with a coach helped me kind of find the ways of how do I assess or rank or grade the day at the end of the day, at the end of a week, at the end of a year. I'm much more wise to not grade it by circumstances and much more likely to grade it by how many adventure moments did I have? How many awe moments did I have? And so I can go to bed that night and know, did I have adventure? Did I have awe? Did I have advocacy moments? Regardless of what my circumstances have been. Yeah. And man, that's a great day.
Yeah.
Like today could be horrific, but because I've spent the day with you and we've had some amazing awe and adventure, it's going to be a good day.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying too, one of my teachers said that until what is significant is created by you, you're not living your own life. You're living some inherited life. And that's what I'm hearing in what you're sharing, this exact thing that you chose awe, adventure, and advocacy to be kind of the measures or what matters in your life. And then you organize your life in that direction. And I imagine it was a very different life for you before you did that.
For sure.
So,
yeah. And sometimes those elements were there, but I just missed them. Right. I didn't know how to value them.
Yeah. Well, that, by the way, that is something I think is very common. And I've seen it so much in my coaching and in my own life, honestly, that I now have a name for it. I call it the law of unacknowledged experience, right? That we want something, but until we declare it, until we acknowledge it or admit it or our awareness expands, we can be experiencing the very thing we say we want, but not have the experience of it because we're not aware of it.
Right.
I'll give you an example.
Right.
That I'll coach leaders, many of whom are men, who will say they want to be good dads. And then we'll ask them, we'll start by defining, well, what does that even mean to you? Right. And then they'll give me usually some qualitative description. Oh, it's, well, I'll spend time, or they'll give it some other kind of description like, oh, I'd spend time with my kids, or, they would just feel that I love them or whatever. But then I would say, okay, well, what kinds of things do you think? Well, first I'll say, do you spend time? Well, yeah, you spend some time. Right. And well, what kinds of things do you do with your kids now? And they'll tell me. And often it's, well, do you think that your kids feel loved when you do that? And they'll acknowledge, well, yeah, I think they do. And I'll say, well, then don't you have the thing that you just said you want?
Interesting.
Right. And in many cases we do. Now, it might be a matter of degree, right? Or depth or whatever, but
consistency.
But very often, if we're not even aware of it, we can have the experience and it can go totally unacknowledged.
Yeah. I think and sometimes self-protection even just kind of go numb in that space.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this for a moment on the topic of living a good life.
Yes.
When we set out to figure out what does that mean? How can we do it? We talked about where does that journey even begin? Where could we look? Not like it's always the answer.
Right.
Life is not, I don't think there's an algorithm exactly for happiness and success and everything, but nevertheless, there are probably principles, right? So when we talked about this, the foundation of a good life, where did we end up?
Well, I was so hoping you were going to throw me something else there. Remind me.
Well, we talked about the power of outcomes or goals.
Oh, yes.
And we talked about emotions, right?
Right.
And this, again, I'll say something I just said a moment ago, but I think this is useful for coaches. It's useful for anyone, I think, but it's particularly useful for coaches because this is the kind of thing that you can use in your own life to level up, right? And be the best version of yourself, therefore being the best coach you can be. But it's also a kind of thing that you can share with your clients, not necessarily through instruction, right? You don't necessarily need to get the whiteboard out and teach them these things. Sometimes you might, principles of goal setting or models in the world of emotional awareness and emotional mastery. You might teach that, right? But maybe through gentle questioning, through probing, through persuasion, through listening to stories and inviting other shares and things like that. Understanding some of these principles that I think we'll talk about today related to emotions and outcomes, I think can be supremely useful for a coach.
Yeah, I'm pausing there because I understand the words you just said. There's no shortcut to this. It's not just reading a book. I mean, I think there is a significant slowing down and a real true introspection and being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
The outcomes are easier to pick. Lots of good examples. You can just pick someone else's outcomes and kind of transfer them as your own. It's the emotion side that really becomes the struggle of just, as you look at your past, how committed are you? How much quit do you have in you? Yeah. How many times have you broken your own promises to yourself? There's the imposter syndrome, right? All of these emotions, and so far I've given all the negative ones, but they're just so real and they're so true. And I think sometimes we get into coaching because we're even trying to figure out our own stuff or trying to coach ourselves first.
We teach what we need to learn.
Yeah. I'm classic example of this. That's where I kind of just pause on the seriousness of those emotions. And what I like about what we're doing here with the Coaches Commonplace, coaching can really be lonely.
Sure.
And the classic coaching relationship, it's rarely, if ever, about you. It's always about them. And so therefore, it's just never about you. And so you're dealing with your own things and you're kind of exhausted by the end of that day. And so it gets lonely. So when I meet someone like you, or we can kind of talk shop, we're part of the 100 coaches community. It helps with being able to talk some of those things through and get in the right alignment with my emotions, and how to be honest and true with those, where I'm not a hypocrite and coaching something that I'm not actually living.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there. And I know a lot of coaches have this concern about, well, maybe I'm not successful enough, or my life isn't organized enough to be a coach. Like, who am I to coach others?
Yeah.
Right. And I will look at the fact that pretty much all the top performers in the world in every field have coaches. Now we're seeing it more and more in business, but whether it's in sports, of course, for a long time, but whether it's acting or, other fields, that the top performers seek coaches. But what's interesting to me is the people who are coaches are very often not necessarily people who've produced those results before or even capable. If you look at athletes, you look at someone like, say, Tiger Woods was an extraordinary golfer. I don't think any of his coaches could play as well as he could, but they can still be effective in helping him increase his effectiveness as a golfer.
Right.
So
no, yeah, it's very true. It's very true, but there's no but there. It's very true. It's still hard.
Yeah.
It's still hard. And I think there's intentionality. You've interviewed a lot of writers, authors that push through that writer block, that just have those morning routines. I found as a coach, though, that helps me. The more intentionally my routine is when I go to bed, and the more true my routine is with how I wake up, kind of puts me in that right position, and the right attitudes, the right emotions tend to come.
Yeah.
I've been married 31 years, and Mel and I have a really fun argument about what should come first. Does behavior drive emotions, or does emotions drive behavior?
Yes.
I knew you were going to say that. I am I'm an ENFP on the Myers-Briggs, and on the Enneagram, I'm a 7. So I'm much more of the party guy, the fun guy, the leader guy. That's true until it isn't. I mean, my pendulum can really swing, but I find that these routines help me. So I don't wait for the emotion.
No.
I focus on the right behavior, and then the emotions tend to come.
Yeah.
I wake up in the morning, I don't want to go to the gym, but I go to the gym, and on the drive back, I'm so glad I went to the gym.
What's that? I forget exactly how it was said or even who said it, but the saying, a writer famously said, I only write when inspiration strikes, but fortunately it strikes every morning at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
And then you sit down and you work. And I remember reading some words that Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune, said about this. He said, look, he said something like, I developed the discipline to write consistently, whether I felt like it or not. And sometimes I did feel like it. He said, but after the fact, when I would read my own writing, I couldn't discern what were the passages that I wrote when I was inspired, when I was feeling inspired, and the ones when I wasn't. So for anybody who might be harboring this idea of like, I'm only going to get after it, I'm only going to build my business, I'm only going to write my book or do whatever, go to the gym if I'm feeling motivated.
Right.
There's another way of living.
Well, I think that's the power of outcomes and emotions, and this idea of good living and focusing on the outcomes and the emotions, because they're both going to serve you well, maybe at different times.
Yeah.
Sometimes they align together, but sometimes my goal of the outcome will push me through my negative emotions.
Sure.
And sometimes my emotions will pull me through when I'm just scared to death of, can I really achieve this outcome?
Yeah. So before we leave this topic of in the foundation of living a good life, emotions and outcomes, as we talk, one thing that has come to mind is the concept of cultivating mindfulness, right? And that first hit my radar. Like, I'm at a point now where I meditate every day, every morning, every night. And sometimes I miss a session, but I'm very, very consistent. And I didn't used to be that way. And when I was first introduced to this idea of meditation, a little bit weird. Like I thought, I've heard of that, for other people or whatever. But I learned from Jack Canfield. He wrote this book, The Success Principles. Like, I think this book is probably 500 pages. It's a lifetime of his wisdom, teaching and learning. And when he was interviewed about the book, it's a very long book, people would say, just give me a soundbite, or tell me the most important principle in it. What's the one thing I could do that will improve the quality of my life the fastest? And Jack said he'd always answer those journalists or those bloggers with the same question. He said, that's easy. It's meditate. It's grow your mindfulness. And I've since heard that and then subsequently experienced it as I practice in my own life. But the thing is, and this is another lesson I learned from Jack, is he said, look, as a coach, your job, like maybe your number one responsibility, is to help your clients expand their awareness to improve the range and quality of possibilities available to them. Right? The philosopher Schopenhauer said that every man or every person takes the limits of his vision to be the limits of the world. In other words, we all get locked in our own little boxes.
So good.
Right? Or as David Foster Wallace said, trapped in our skull-shaped, I think he said kingdoms. we get trapped.
Yeah.
And helping, a coach can help us break out. We can help ourselves break out of those limited worldviews. And mindfulness is one of those. Now, here's the thing. And many people listening to this have probably already got their own practice. So I might be preaching to the choir, so to speak. But there's always the opportunity to deepen. And I'm speaking to myself here too, right?
Yeah,
to deepen
so
the quality.
good.
And I can get pretty geeked out about this because I'll think about it this way, and coaches can think about this. If you had the opportunity to travel back in time or forward in time, 5,000 years, but you couldn't take anything with you, no technology, no books, right? Not even a photograph, it was just you.
Okay.
Maybe you were dressed, so it wasn't too weird that you were naked, but you could go and you couldn't take anything. What would you say, or what would you do to help improve the quality of life for the people you would meet?
No, that's interesting, because one, there's an assumption that they would need it, that their quality of life whatever they would require that.
Sure.
But I know what you mean there. Well, in one sense, I think what I find myself spending time coaching on today were probably the elements where they were still healthy, where everyone still lived on the same 40 acres. It was probably more of an oral tradition. They probably all ate dinner together. I mean, just some of that community aspects that were, the loneliness that we feel today. Gosh, what a great question. My mind's going to, they'd probably have more impact on me.
Yeah, it's probably true for me too. And in a similar kind of question is this idea that, we've developed all this technology. We've learned so much, especially in the last few hundred years, right? As the pace of life seems to have accelerated. But is life any better for people? Are they any happier? Are they any healthier? Right? Like truly, is the quality of our lives better than it was 100 years ago? And I don't know for sure.
Yeah, maybe certainly the length that we're alive, medicine's better. So I think physically better, emotionally, maybe not better.
Emotionally, maybe not better. And that's part of this idea of mindfulness, right? Is being able to recognize, first of all, to do our best to deal with what is so. Because I think as physical beings existing in time and space, being in this universe, with our limitations of our five senses and our intellect, I don't think we're perceiving reality objectively or fully, right? It's being limited.
Yes.
We know dogs can hear sounds, ranges of sounds we can't hear. We know our eyes can't see the full spectrum of light, right? That's available in the universe. And then the intellect, as we've heard of this, biases and filters, we have so much, right? So if we have any hope of, I don't even want to say transcending that, but like becoming aware, at least becoming aware of that, I think mindfulness is essential. And I've seen this in my own life because growing up in a family of wealth, that we weren't always wealthy. I mean, my parents were middle class, like blue collar, salt of the earth people. But nevertheless, I have to acknowledge I've always been very fortunate. And I have seen that possessions won't bring lasting happiness. Achievement doesn't seem to bring lasting happiness. It's essential, I think, for happiness to have a goal, to have a direction, to understand why we're moving that way. But once we reach it, it's in the rearview mirror right away, right? So it's not possessions. It's not even achievements or experiences. We talk about this idea of, not waiting until someday. Right. Like, and you had your own version of that when you sold everything.
Right.
and traveled for a couple of years with your family. And those experiences will always exist for you as happy memories, I would think. Probably not all happy.
No.
Right.
Several times on the side of the road with a flat tire in the RV and kids screaming and wife has a headache. And real life still happened.
Yeah, real life still happens. And so if it's not possessions, it's not achievements, it's not even experiences, if there's anything that can help us to be happy, what is it? And I think and happy isn't even the right word, I don't think, right? Because even then, what does that mean? And there's versions of it. Are we talking about joy? Are we talking about pleasure? Are we talking about ecstasy? Whatever. But I do think that this is our default state. I could be wrong, but I love what Khalil Gibran wrote, that your joy is your sorrow unmasked. Meaning that this is who we are at essence. And we can see it with a child who's open, who's free, who's curious, right? Who's generous.
Right.
And somewhere along the way, I think we tend to lose that as adults. But if there's a path back, a path home, to return to ourself or the child within us, or to find the happiness at our essence or the love, I think mindfulness it's a key, if not the key.
I agree, brilliant. I mean, you started kind of talking about the hierarchy of these needs. I think there's different things that unlock us different ways. I like looking at Elon Musk and what he has accomplished and where he's used mindfulness to push himself. And so his sister was interviewed and was asked this question. Serious journalist asked this question: is your brother like an alien? And she smiled, and I love her response. or is he from the future? I guess that was the question. Is Alon from the future? And she's like, no, he isn't. She's like, but I actually think he's the only one that's currently living in the present. Because he's using all the materials and all the knowledge that's currently available right now. Any of us could have done what he is currently doing. But by her theory, most of us are living in the past.
Yeah.
He's the only one living in the present. And so I wonder, what does that mean for you and I? How can we push ourselves in these spaces? But I like you're separating the emotion of content or being happy so we can enjoy the journey without being tied to the outcome.
Yeah.
How would you, we kind of listen to the same people. How would you open that up?
Well, I do think, so then when I come to this thing about emotions and outcomes and why this is such a valuable starting point when it comes to living a good life, is the idea or maybe the reality that in every moment we've already produced some outcome. You have a net worth, you have a body fat percentage, you have a level of satisfaction with your marriage. You have all these outcomes,
right?
Whether you had goals or not, you have already produced them. And what's more, you're in the process of producing them right now, right? As Tony Robbins says, you always succeed in producing a result. So you're already doing something. The question is it one that you want? Is it one you're even aware of, right? And if not, there's an opportunity there. Now, a pessimist might call that a problem. There's a problem.
Right.
An optimist might call that an opportunity. So much of this, again, is in choice, awareness and choice of how you even frame things. But that's the first reality here. So you already have a set of outcomes, but are they the ones you want? Are you even aware of what they are? And you're in the process of producing them. The second thing is with emotions. You already have, you already experience and I think humans are capable of experiencing a very broad range of emotions, but most of us seem to we make an emotional home on some part of that spectrum. And there's some big ones for us, whether it's frustration or whether it's anger or, whatever. And we tend to call this like it's our mood or maybe even our personality.
Right.
But we don't need to get stuck somewhere on that spectrum. We can open up or explore more of that's available to us. And what's more, I really believe that we're always looking for a feeling. Whatever goal it is we set for ourselves is ultimately a strategy to achieve a feeling of whatever. Oh, I'm lovable, right? I'm good enough, I'm special or whatever.
Yeah,
but we don't see that.
Or it's the excuse, right? Of being the victim or of why I couldn't achieve it. Yes?
I'm not sure.
That made sense in my head.
Well, I'm not, maybe. Say more.
Well, I think there's also it's the justification. Well, it's that X factor. It's the saboteur. It's the emotions that plays into of I'm doing my best, or the emotion of I'm exhausted.
Sure.
And that's why I couldn't do whatever it is that I was wanting to do.
Sure. Well, and as human beings, we're organisms.
Right.
And as far as I can tell, every organism is motivated toward pleasure and away from pain. That I think it really can be distilled that simple. Now, sometimes that might be too reductive, but other times it's very basic, right? So we'll move away from shame, guilt, remorse, right? Sadness. These things will move away from that towards something that we experience as less painful or more pleasurable. But a challenge in our lives, I think, especially our modern lives, is that a lot of what brings us pleasure actually has a pretty significant downside. So that comes back to awareness and the power of coaching to help our clients, even know what they want. So what is it that you want? I'm committed that is life's operative question. Now, it's often one of the hardest questions to answer, but it can be one of the most useful questions to have clarity. What do you want? Yeah.
You and I are both recently exposed to a working definition of reality is usually defined by these three things: pain, uncertainty, and constant hard work. And I think we're either trying to reduce those three or find the opposite of those three.
Right.
The opposite of pain, the opposite of uncertainty, and the opposite of constant hard work.
Right. Absolutely. So with this, just opening up this as a line of inquiry.
Yeah.
For coaches in their own lives, really mapping out What is it that I want? What is it I want in my business? What is it that I want in my health? What is it that I want in my relationship? And whether those are set as goals or aspirations or intentions or standards or whatever word you would use.
Right.
Like being deliberate about that and keeping it somewhere. I know my experience for a lot of years was I would go to a seminar, or I would like maybe watch a TED Talk or hear something, read a book, and I'd have a little bit of inspiration, capture some thoughts and set that notebook aside. And maybe this comes exactly back to that idea of a commonplace book, of having some kind of a repository that you can return to, that you can refine, right? That might not always be true for you, that this is my purpose or these are my goals, but knowing where to go to even find them that were true for you at one time, and either remember them, reorient yourself to them, or edit them and keep living in the direction of what matters most.
Yeah, you reminding me of what I'm hearing. A friend of ours, Aisha Barcel, is a very well-known designer, designs products and spaces through a phase of deconstructing and then reconstructing, and then comes out with something new. And then took that into this idea of designing a life and designing the life that you would love. The essence of that designing is having a plan. That's what I'm hearing you say. And so you're going to start a business. I mean, especially if you're taking out loans, that bank wants to see the business plan. I remember my first year of coaching and taking one of these templates. This was late 2006 when I initially did this business plan. And I've gone back and looked at it. And it's really interesting to see how well that set me on the path and how much we exceeded those first 24 months. But there's something about having a plan for your coaching practice, but also having a plan for your marriage, having a plan as a parent, having a plan for your physical health, your mental health. I find we wing too much of that. We take our natural ability. I think we're going to get to that question of, as a coach, can you be made a coach? Are you born a coach? But I think that plan aspect, taking whatever potential you have and ability you have, we know this. We just don't do the discipline to actually go and write it down.
Yeah. Well, and with that, like hearing what you're saying too, I'm reminded of how I think there's a balance, or there can be, we can look for one, between what I would say using the intellect and the heart, the head and the heart, or I've heard it described as maybe the ego and the essence, right? That there's a time and a place to be really thoughtful. And there's another, I think, a time and a place to feel into these things and to let our plans come from both. Because I've heard it said, that no plan survives contact with reality. Right?
Yes, right.
And the quote that I've heard attributed to Eisenhower about plans are worthless, but planning is everything. And it's just that thought.
I really like that.
Right? Of where am I trying to go and why? And what are the strategies that I would use to get there? And who do I have to be in the matter? And what other resources might I enroll? But making the plan causes you to confront those questions.
That's really great distinction.
Right? But life is so dynamic that the moment you have it written down in a plan and the world changes, you change.
Right.
Right? That saying that a man can't stand in the same river twice. Right? Because when he comes back, it's a different river and he's a different man. And that's true of our plans too, but it doesn't mean the plan isn't worth creating. But I guess to come back to where I started this idea of not doing our best to not only create the plan from the intellect. And I would go even further to say, and this is one of those things I'm kind of gently looking for the universe to continue teaching me on, is what is the value of non-doing, right? Spontaneous right action, or wu wei in Chinese teaching, right? And to let life work through us, right? One of my teachers suggests that in life, there's only aliveness and patterns that block aliveness. And how can we let those patterns that block the aliveness that wants to flow through us? And maybe this is just, I know it's not just me, but the longer I live, the more I believe that the same life inside me is the same life in that tree outside and in you. And it can sound kind of
life
woo-woo.
Force.
Right, like a life, but there is life, right? Like somebody suggested to me that we tend to think of birth and death, or life and death as opposites. We think of life and death as opposites often. But that life and death aren't opposites, that birth and death are opposites, but that life has no opposite. That life is one unending process that is unfolding, and we're a part of it. And I think, by the way, just to keep going on this, I'm kind of on you see, I get kind of animated about this, that when we see ourselves as distinct from, I won't even say from life, although I think that's what's happening, but from each other, you and me, especially labels and descriptions. And this is my religion and we're right and you're wrong. And this is my political party. And, like all this, that we're not seeing ourselves as part of the life that is happening. Right. So how can we create our plans from and let life work with and through us?
Yeah. I want to make a distinction for myself and then for anyone who's listening with me, a brilliant sharing this inner thought. I think the plan is so necessary because it doesn't just happen. I know that's not what you're just saying.
Right. Life
is going to happen, but your success or your impact, it doesn't just happen. Right? Because in boredom, in lack of a plan, you can find yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time, making the wrong decision. I think with the plan and with life happening, I think what the plan's helped me with is helped me. The goal isn't to not fall. The goal is to not fall further than necessary and to recover as authentically as possible. Mm-hmm. The times I didn't have a outcome, a goal that I was striving for, or put the discipline in and writing out a plan. And like what you said, it's not about the plan. It was the process of producing the plan is where the real value is. When I didn't have that and I got distracted or I got tripped up, I fell further than was necessary. Mm-hmm. And I stayed down there a really long time.
Yeah.
Walls up, closed up. I've shared my story with you of climbed the rock with the intentionality of jumping off of it. That was a time period where I didn't have a plan because life was happening, and it's not just all good life happening, it's bad life happening too. Yeah. Mm. And so by processing that plan and being able to reset myself and not fall further than necessary, it really is life or death at that point.
Yeah, it can be.
That plan saved my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. And that's why I say for me, this is like an inquiry that I'm in.
Yeah.
Because I'll look at it and it's like, I don't think that tree has a plan, right? But I've heard it said, I think it was Lao Tzu, that nature never hurries, yet everything is accomplished. And it's like, it seems to be going on just fine.
Yeah, but I wonder if the difference, Brilliant, is the tree doesn't have a plan, but also doesn't have choice.
Okay, Dean. So with this philosophical line of inquiry we've been following, let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to something that might be more immediate for people listening, more relatable, more useful. And it's on the topic of coaching, about whether coaches are born or made. Do we have a choice in this matter, or are effective coaches just a certain personality type? Or, if we wonder if maybe we can do it, or we have doubts about it, whatever, like, are coaches born or are they made? Do we have a choice in this matter?
Such a great question. I've often thought, if we go back thousands of years, like we mentioned earlier, or 10,000 years ago, were there coaches then? Maybe that's not what they were called, but just those that were in that space, with a natural ability. So if I do go back thousands of years ago from that classic question, are leaders born or leaders made? There was a long time period in our human history where it was, you're born that way. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was just that royalty and that bloodline, and they call it just the great man theory. There was just a God-given ability to lead. And then we started making these observations that there were certain traits that seemed to be common and those that led well. But then we started going into it also depends on just the situation. Because you could have a specific trait for leadership, but if the circumstances weren't aligned with that, then the trait really didn't add value. So if I think about coaches, I think there are those. I've met them. They are just naturally curious. They are just naturally good at being able to pull out just this greatness in someone else. So I think there are those that are born to do this. And I think there's the rest of us where through blood, sweat, and tears and taking some level of ability and then practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing and kind of honing that skill. I think there are known traits. I think there are known skills that differentiate between a good coach and a great coach. What do you think on this topic?
Well, I do think that there are people who are maybe better suited. I would say it's a judgment, right? But there are people whose personalities lend to them being effective coaches or even, gravitating toward coaching in the first place. And at the same time, I do believe that coaching is a skill that we can learn, just like we can learn to drive a stick shift or we can learn to bake a cake. Now the result of that, right? The ride might be a little jerkier for one, or the cake might be a little more beautiful or taste better for another. But nevertheless, I think that it's something we can learn. You can learn to hit a golf ball. It's not always easy, but you can learn it.
Right.
Right. So for people who wonder, but here's also like another marker that I look at is if somebody is wondering if they can be a coach or if they have what it takes or whatever. Now it's a different question, a little bit of a different question to ask if they can earn a living or support themselves or whatever.
Right.
But if they're just asking like, can I be effective at, can I be good at this? I think anybody asking that question is probably the kind of person who's more likely to be adept at coaching. It's just my theory.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that assessment. When I went through my certification process, the last 6 months are just really the practicum where the challenge was go find real life clients that would pay you something. Mm-hmm. And then I was in the ICF accredited certification program where I had to then send in to a professor. This is in New York, a couple of my coaching sessions. Mm-hmm. And then they were going to grade them.
Was this like a video recording?
No, it's just audio, an audio recording. So with permission, the client knew that. So of course I picked my best ones, my best coaching sessions, and they would be 15-minute segments that I would send out. So this guy, Ron Renaud, was the professor who would listen to this. He knows me he doesn't know me at all. Uh-huh. Calls me and he's like, hey, I listened to your different segments. He's like, let me ask you a couple of questions on your background. Okay. He's like, you were in sales. I'm like, I was in sales. He goes, you were in pharmaceutical sales. I get, no, he knows nothing about me. Wow. And he's reading my mail.
Maybe he's an internet stalker.
Yeah.
I mean,
could be, but no. And I said, I was in pharmaceuticals. And he said, you're really going to struggle being a coach.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's pretty tough feedback. It's a little too late. I've already quit my job, right? I'm already really fully invested with this. Why would you say that? And then what am I going to have to do? And then he said, Dean, you've mastered the art of fake curiosity. He said, I can hear you. He goes, so pause that story. I have some natural ability in being just instinctive and just being able to see what that person's not saying. Body language and just I obey my instinct. So with that, it served me well in sales, right? I knew what you needed to hear and I figured it out and I'll lead you to the sale. But in coaching, that's different. He's like, Dean, he goes, in every recording you sent me, he goes, early, you already figured out what the problem was. Mm-hmm. And through using questions, you lined them up to your conclusion.
Wow.
He said, on that scale of you, 1 is you've damaged this individual, and 10, this was masterful coaching. He said, I'm going to give you a 3.
Holy cow.
That was rough to then go sit back because I knew it was true. I just never heard it labeled that way of I've mastered the art of fake curiosity. So to be able to get into that space of having some natural ability, but then to really sit in that space and trust that you as my client, that you're creative, you're resourceful, you're whole. I don't know what's best for you.
Yeah.
Now I'm good at pulling out all these different perspectives, but it's your choice. So going beyond fake curiosity to genuine curiosity, he was right. It was hard. It was really, really challenging for me.
How did you do it?
Great question. It's assuming I did it.
That's right. There was a leading question. There was an assumption implicit in that question.
I'm sure I know that I have done it. I've gotten that feedback. But so one, it was being authentic and transparent to some of my clients, where I tell them my own story, especially those initial coaching sessions. And being a newer coach, I might do this. I'm watching myself. If it feels like I figured you out, and now, you should have your attorney saying objection, leading the witness, right? Feel free to pause me. So that helped. And then having a great community, and then continuing the certification process, I was getting feedback, right? They put you in this triads, right? And you're coaching, you're role playing, and someone else is listening, and they're like, you're doing it, you're doing it. So that helped. Just muscle memory.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing in that's common to everything I heard you just say was awareness. You expanded your awareness of yourself, right? But then there was some external structure, whether it was the client, like making them aware, and then making a request of them. There was the triad, there was the structure there.
Right.
So there was awareness, and there was also, you conditioned your environment, and you enrolled other people in your effort to become more curious and less a master of the fake curiosity.
Yeah. And there was my intent was good the first time. Even when I was in sales, my intent wasn't to sell something to someone that they didn't need, right? I was using this skill for good, not for evil. But just a changing the mindset that to best serve them was to change my intent to just be curious, period.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Did you struggle with that? Where you figured you know how to solve their problem, and if they would just listen to you, you could solve this?
I don't think so, because
you don't get frustrated with clients who are like, it's right there, you don't see it?
No, I don't. I mean, I think of that classic Buddhist story of the recruiter who comes to the father and says his son has been conscripted.
Yes.
Right.
And
but then he's like, oh, what terrible news. But then the son breaks his leg. And the father's response is always, we'll see.
Right. Yeah.
Right. We'll see.
Right.
As things are good and bad, we'll see. That in the bigger context of life, like, I don't know. Right. I don't know if losing a job or getting divorced or getting a diagnosis is actually a good or bad thing. So I don't know. I don't think this, again, is where I maybe get a little philosophical, but I don't know that there is such a thing as a problem. Like, often what the problem is that we think it's a problem, and I'm not sure there's such thing as a solution. So I certainly don't know whether those things even exist, let alone what they would be for my client. Right. Yeah.
What I love you're bringing up is how these belief systems or these models that we run in our heads influence and then how we coach.
Right. They do. Absolutely.
Because those of us are on the other side of almost every problem has a solution. And my God, there are problems. I'm not saying that that's me, but I know there's coaches that feel that way. They show up to that client way different, with a different level of patience.
Yeah. And then, one of my current beliefs, or the thing I'm testing, is also, if there is such thing as a problem and a solution, that often the solution merely contains the seed of the next problem. Right. So in a way, solving problems becomes an endless waste of time. And my goal, or one of my goals, or my approaches with a client, is not to help them solve their problems. That's not how I look at it.
This is good.
Right. It's, I want them to be the person they want to be. Right. And I want them to live the life they want to live, whatever that means to them. Yes. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it should be. Right. At the moment we're working together, they probably don't either, or we wouldn't be working together.
That's right.
But that's my commitment to my client, is to do what I can with what I know and the talents that I have to help them be who they want to be, live the life they want to live. Right. That's it. And beyond that, like, I don't know. I don't know what's right. I don't know what's right for myself, let alone what's right for you. Exactly. Right. Now I know things I'm committed to.
Right.
So I know that. And that brings us back to both awareness. It brings us back to language, the power of language.
Yes.
Right. Honoring desire and our truth. So some of this, I realize, or at least my own story about myself, is when I talk about it, I can get pretty philosophical.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain people that we could stay up till 5 a.m. chatting, this way. And there's other people that will just tell me the answer, give me the solution,
right,
give me the tool, and let me move on, or maybe make some money or help a bunch of people. And that's fine. But this is just the way that I look at coaching. It's not my role to fix you. It's not my role. It's not even my role to help you solve problems.
Yeah. You and I have talked about just what are the foundational skills or traits for master level coaching? And then how does that tie into certification? How do you blend those two things together?
Well, as I've learned and as I've practiced, I do believe that there are qualities. So first of all, I believe there's skills. Now I'm repeating something I said before, that I do absolutely think there are skills that we can learn. And we won't go deep into those now, but in future conversations on the Coaches Commonplace, we'll explore what some of those are. And we'll invite people. I want to invite people, or at least read, some of what they've written, to share with us what they've learned. But A, there are skills. And B, I think there are qualities or attributes that we can cultivate, we can aspire, we can practice, whether that's empathy, whether that's curiosity, whether that's presence, right? Whether that's humor, whether that's trusting our intuition. So there's these different things that, again, I can't tell you how to cultivate your intuition, but I can suggest to you that it is a quality that, if you cultivate, will help you be an effective coach. Yeah,
well said.
Right? So there's that as well. And in the coaches training program that we've created, I think we're at 13 right now, 13 of these. And I'm not saying it's the stone tablets of coaching, the qualities that make an effective coach. But I think coaches, when they're learning this, they're learning how to do this, they're learning how to do this well, they recognize, oh yes, those things that if I don't want to say focus or amplify or cultivate that, but that's probably the right word. Like if they consciously bring those to the fore of a conversation or an interaction with another, or just, a coaching session, that can help their client to experience them as an effective coach, and themselves as an effective coach, and to enjoy it. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. To get better, there has to be a scorecard. There has to be areas where you're focusing in on. So on those skills. So whether that's, I do a lot of corporate business coaching. So trying to find the right skills as a coach that go into the spaces of strategy. Mm-hmm. They go into the spaces of execution. They go into the spaces of culture. How do I pull those different aspects out of this leader? Because sometimes we're not coaching for development, we're coaching for change. So there's an X to Y by when, right? There's a metric that has to shift. Now, it always comes back to behavior, but what are the skill sets a coach needs to have to get access to that in the client?
Well, and I would say this too. I think this can be a useful way of looking at or thinking about coaching. Is part of our role, I believe, as coaches. And my inner critic is coming up in this description, but I'm going to use it anyway, is to hold space.
It's good.
Right? Because just like we occupy a space in the physical universe with our bodies in this moment, we could plot our coordinates in the universe. I think we go places emotionally too. Right? And sometimes it can be helpful for someone to invite us into a space where that aspect of ourselves, that emotional aspect of ourselves, I don't know the words to use on this, but we can start to explore, and we can start to allow ourselves to be seen and to be heard. And that we can grow on our own. We can read a book. We can go to the gym. We can do stuff that can help us be healthier, happier, more effective versions of ourselves. But I think there are certain ways that we can only grow when there's a witness to our growth, right? A collaborator, a co-creator, there's something, a coach.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying a coach is the only person that can do that. Sometimes a friend can do that. Sometimes a spouse or a partner can do that. Another human being, take off the label, can be that. But I think a coach has a unique opportunity and has been invited, if not explicitly, to fill that function for people. And to me, that's an incredible privilege.
Yes. You saying that reminded me of this. And I've gotten to, over the 17 years I've coached, I continue to get this feedback. How I coach Monday morning versus how I coach Friday afternoon. Same guy, different coaching. So my average client has been with me over 10 years.
Uh-huh.
They're the ones who gave me the feedback of how I coach early in the morning versus how I coach in the afternoon, because I'm tired. In the beginning of that week versus the end of the week, it just tells me my skill level shows up differently with my energy level and my ability to be present and all those things.
Yeah.
I'm the same person. For me, it just reiterates how important those skills are.
Yeah.
Because when they wane or when they're fully present. So now I've got clients that will schedule me at specific times, depending on how their life is going. If they really want me to be sharp, they'll get me earlier in the week or earlier in the day. And if they want to be able to slide on some things, they'll schedule me in the afternoons or at the end of the week. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting, but I think totally normal, right? Because we're always, just like everything in nature, that there are seasons and there are phases.
Right.
And of course, that's going to be true with us, energy levels and that.
So my presence just isn't enough. The fact that I'm just a coach isn't enough.
Well, I think it might have more value or power than just the act of being with another.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point. However, I appreciate that.
That's a fancy way of saying, but
I think you're letting me off the hook there. Just the presence of a coach is there. But man, is it different. So as I become aware of that, because when I'm on, I don't often get to toot my own horn here. I'm really good. My ability to pull greatness out of somebody. But when I haven't done the right pre-work, when I don't have clarity of outcome, when I don't have clarity of emotion, when I don't have all these things we've been talking about, when I haven't had my time with you, when I haven't had the time with other coaches in the community of that iron sharpening iron, when I'm not reading, when I'm not pushing myself, I'm not as good as a coach.
Yeah. Well, that goes back exactly to the thing that's come up in this conversation a few times, is that anything that helps you be a better version of yourself will help you show up as a better, more effective coach. So I think we're seeing that in what you're saying. And at the same time, I also want to just call out this idea that, we can show up with more intensity. We can show up for our clients with more clarity or whatever. And at the same time, I really want to invite people listening, especially those who are maybe at the beginning of their coaching journey or they're thinking about it, to really consider or even believe that you don't have to do anything that you're not already doing. And you don't have to be somebody you're not. You don't have to force yourself or contort yourself or will yourself or whatever to be or do something that you're not already to be an effective coach. Now, we show up differently, different times of day, different day of the week, different person. We have different chemistry, like all of that. And I don't know if I'm making my point clearly, but sometimes I think we can go, I don't know if I have this in me to do this thing, but I just want to suggest that you absolutely do. And it's not a function of like going and doing, all these push-ups and affirmations and like all this. You don't have to be someone you're not to be an effective coach.
I think that's a great reminder. I often find many of us did not choose coaching, right? We've kind of used that phrase. It chose you.
Yeah.
My earliest age, I would be the person 9 years old, 10 years old, that people would come find on the playground and tell me all their stuff. Right? What is that? I hear that happen with a lot of people that now do full-time coaching. So it picked me. So if you've stayed this long, even in this podcast, you already have everything you need.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, the and here is that there's range, and what certifications, what communities have done for me within that space of authenticity, it's pushed me in my range.
Yeah.
There's times where I come on too strong and I need to yield. And there's places where I'm playing really small and I need to show up way bigger. And so that's where I think the opportunity to grow and to come participate in this commonplace where we get to share these things together of where did you pull back and where have you pushed yourself to be uncomfortable, all within the confines and boundaries of being authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I propose that when we pick up our next conversation that we resume, we'll see, unless something seems more interesting or more relevant. But where we set an intention here to pick up then is on the topic of certification.
Okay.
Right. And whether it's useful or not useful, how much it really matters, like that kind of thing, maybe which one to look for.
Yeah. Because I think the teaser is, I think we disagree.
But we haven't talked about it because we're saving it for this conversation. And I have said, and I don't think I have strong opinions about many things, but I have a pretty strong opinion about this. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
And I'll say I also have a strong opinion. I think we're going to agree, but we're going to come at this with way different expectations around it. I think
we'll see.
We've talked about so many things, but we've never talked about this topic. I can't wait for this.
Awesome. Well, Dean, it's really good to see you. And as I said earlier, that I have declared that 2023 is and will be the best year of my life. And this hour I've proved myself right. So
nice
thank
work. You. And I'm here and I'm expanding.
Awesome. In all the right ways, I hope.
In all the right ways.